Hey kids, Uncle Tony here to talk Star Wars, a subject with which I am deeply familiar and about which I am definitely qualified to opine. Now, in my last rant, I said goodbye to Doctor Who, and although I tried to be positive by showing missed opportunities and the possibilities that still exist to right the ship, I was, admittedly, part of the toxic fandom for that franchise. If you're expecting the same thing here, I just can't give it to you. I can be honest about the levels of quality in the new trilogy in both the storytelling and the filmmaking, which are definitely not equal and balanced scales, but I'm not ready to leave Star Wars behind. I'm still looking to the future of a galaxy far, far away. So smash that like button. Subscribe, because I need the numbers. And check out the other nonsense here on my channel. I know you're going to comment, so I will respond. Mostly. May the 4th be with you. Let's talk Star Wars. The story of how and when I came to Star Wars is the exact same as my Doctor Who experience. I owe it all to a homesick British grandmother who took the kids to see a sci-fi B-movie in November of '77. The summer of '77 was all New York Yankees baseball and my own burgeoning Little League career, so I had to wait for them to win the World Series before I'd let anything else distract me. Now, it was the Yankees of the mid-'70s, so yes, they won. I didn't win shit because I sucked at baseball, but they won everything. They were unstoppable, one of the best batting lineups since Murderers Row. I will fight you in the comments. But I digress. Graham took us to Star Wars because she knew Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing from the movies back home in England. It was familiar for her and fun for us. She introduced me to Doctor Who soon after, and they have both been with me ever since, in heart and in mind. But while Doctor Who needs to reinvent itself for each new generation and succeeds or fails based on that, Star Wars does not. And that's why my views about Star Wars have changed over the years. Evolved, matured, whatever. I see it differently now. Here are some of the epiphanies I've had. First, no one will ever see Star Wars the way I saw Star Wars again. The fraternity of fans that saw the movie in the theater in 1977 is gigantic, but diminishing. There are no new members of that club, and someday we will all be gone. Respect us, younglings. Like World War II veterans, the world will count down to the last living person to have seen Star Wars in its original run. I've seen them all in the theater. If I live long enough, maybe I'll be famous for it, and then I'll die. But Star Wars will continue. And that's the second epiphany. Disney bought something immortal, and they're going to own it forever. And that's most of what they do, so you can trust them to do it. I was a purist back in the day. I hated that Lucas kept fucking with his own creation, and not always to its benefit on shot first, but always to its longevity. From here on out, Star Wars will be consumed completely differently than it has ever been. The 9-film saga is complete, for better or worse. Doesn't even matter. It's done. And Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, still works its magic. It's still bringing in new fans. I'm on YouTube, obviously, and I watch others react to these films for the first time, and I can see the same childish joy beaming out of their faces. It works. It still works. Whatever flaws the Star Wars saga has, and it has many, it is consistent with Star Wars as a franchise. Because epiphany number 3 is the hard one. Star Wars has never been good. Except maybe that once. To expect these movies to be good is ridiculous. There is nothing in the history of the Star Wars canon to lead you to the conclusion that the Star Wars saga movies are any good. They're not. Try watching A New Hope without the John Williams score, or with David Prowse doing Vader's voice. Make grimace face. Star Wars is not good. Star Wars is to good what infamy is to fame. In other words, it transcends its own limitations and jumps beyond good into something more unforgettable. But Star Wars was a B movie, right down to the cast. Fuck, Peter Cushing was famous because of Dracula movies, and he got top billing. To watch the original Star Wars with a critical eye is to see two-dimensional characters, terrible dialogue, and cheeseball special effects, almost all of which are mitigated by other circumstances. The two-dimensional characters get the benefit of additional movies, which end up being better written. The terrible dialogue gets the benefit of a heroic John Williams score. Somebody said, think Wagner, and he did. And the cheeseball effects get the benefit of constant tinkering. You should see the first Death Star explosion. I'll put a link. The original Star Wars, the one I saw in the theater, was not an immortal film. It could have died then and there. Instead, it became a cultural zeitgeist that spawned a movement called fandom. Empire Strikes Back was the only truly good film of the bunch, and there's a reason why it remains in the #1 spot even at the completion of the saga. But even it is not the same movie I saw in the theaters, and frankly, Cloud City is much better off because of it. The entire third act of Empire has been heavily re-edited, re-effected, and recolorized, but it still makes people cry. So, in 1981, the fandom was gifted with a film which was better than the original, and the expectations of generations yet to come began. See, I remember Return of the Jedi being a huge disappointment. I didn't like it at the time. And we knew the drought was coming. There were no more plans for Star Wars after Jedi. Lucas had teased that he had 6 more stories to go, but not yet. So like Doctor Who, Star Wars went off the air for a decade or more. But an interesting divide happened in that time, and it's called the Ewok effect. Basically, if you were born after Jedi, you more easily accept the appearance of the Ewoks. They seem natural and somehow they belong there. If you experienced the Ewoks in the theater, you fucking hated them. We were disappointed that Endor wasn't Kashyyyk and we got fucking teddy bears instead of the army of Wookiees that we should have had. We were the first of the savagely entitled Star Wars fans, and you are goddamn lucky there was no internet at the time or Star Wars would have died. And we would have been as wrong as the toxic fandom of today. Star Wars is going to outlive you. It will be consumed whole or in bites or morsels as the generations continue, and it will never, ever be as good as you want it to be. Meditate on that, my young apprentices. Meditate on that, my young apprentices. If all this is true, if Star Wars is immortal and the quality doesn't matter, then why do I believe in the future of it? Because you know who Little Red Riding Hood is. Stay with me. There have been many versions over hundreds of years. You've seen a movie, maybe. Your favorite cartoon did an episode like that. Maybe your parents even read you the story from a real book or Kindle when you were a child. You know who Little Red Riding Hood is, but I guarantee you, you have never read the real story. If I told you one of the original stories of Red Riding Hood, dating back to France in the mid-1800s, involved her being tricked into cannibalizing her dead grandmother, suggested bestiality, and had a dramatic scatological exchange, literally a conversation about taking a shit that helps Red Riding Hood escape the wolf naked, would you believe me? I'll put a link. As it is with Red, so it goes with Star Wars. Regardless of the shit you may find in the deep past, it is immortal, so that someday someone can create something better out of a disgusting old tale. And of course, I believe in Star Wars because Disney owns it. George could still own it and be sitting on it for decades upon decades, but Disney needs it to be a revenue stream. And to that end, Disney's created nearly as much Star Wars material in 5 or 6 years than Lucasfilm made in 20. And the output is only going to increase because Disney spent $4.05 billion on the rights, and they are losing their ass during this shutdown. Between 30 to 100 million a day, depending on who you believe. Holy shit. Interestingly, though, as of May 2020, Disney now owns Empire and Jedi, which had previously belonged to Fox, but they won't own the rights to New Hope until the terms of the merger are complete, since Fox owns Episode 4 in perpetuity. A good legal word, it means forever. And forever is a mighty long time, but I'm here to tell you, there's something else. And it's called money, and by spending a shit ton of it, Disney now owns all the franchises. This right here is the most impressive infographic on the subject of what Disney owns that I've seen, and it's from TitleMax of all companies. I'll put a link so you can view it yourselves, and it may not be up to date when you look at it since I'm hoping this video will be around for a while. Like and subscribe, but it is still a mind blower. Certainly, by now, people are screaming that the trilogy Disney produced for the Star Wars saga was woke identity politics bullshit with rehashed storytelling and an incomprehensible plot. Sure, yeah. And you could prove it's a failure mathematically, the contracting fan base, the Rotten Tomatoes score, the box office numbers. Oh, and by the way, Rey and Kylo toys don't sell worth a shit. Okay, yeah. All that is exactly true. Except none of that matters, because just try keeping a baby Yoda in stock. You see, there's always more Star Wars. And while it may be hit and miss, every now and then you get an Empire Strikes Back or a Mandalorian series or some of the best cartoon storytelling you've ever seen in Clone Wars and Rebels. And fuck, have you played Fallen Order? There's always a bigger fish. If this saga blew it, so what? Maybe the next one won't, or the one after that. Imagine an Old Republic series that played like Game of Thrones. And I'm going to tell you, that idea is so good. Disney, call me, I'm available. And there's controversy, of course, but you could ignore that too. You hear them say they're playing gender politics with the characters. The Force is female. Kathleen Kennedy's destroying the franchise. Get woke, go broke, and all the rest of the noisy bullshit. Ignore it, or at least put it in perspective. The latest thing I heard was that Kathleen Kennedy killed Galaxy's Edge when she talked them out of making it based on the original trilogy. Specifically, that it would have been the Mos Eisley spaceport, and she got it based on the timeline of her inferior series instead. Look, I like Force Awakens for the member berries. I eat it up and I can watch it over and over. But Rey and Finn are boring, and I'm there to watch Han and Chewie fly the Falcon. I still love the idea that Han and Kylo could have shared an I love you, I know moment right before, spoilers. I think The Last Jedi is underrated and probably would have been made better if allowed to see the story through to what was shaping up to be a more satisfying conclusion. I think The Rise of Skywalker was a noisy waste of my money, and it was the last film I saw in the theater. I didn't like it at all, and yet I'll have to see it several more times before I know for sure. But I was in Galaxy's Edge at the end of February this year, just before the shutdown. I can report there is nothing wrong with the time and place in which they've set the park experience. It's a place called Batuu, but if they ever want to change it to Mos Eisley for an anniversary event, it would be easy enough. Chewie roams the park. R2-D2 is there already. The park performers, in fact, often have a better handle on the new characters than the movies do. I honestly like the Rey we met better than Daisy Ridley. And Kylo Ren wasn't afraid to make children cry. Always a plus in my book, because for a park performer, that is walking the edge. Rise of the Resistance is a fantastic ride and a wildly immersive experience. When the door to the shuttle opens into an Imperial hangar, you will believe the Empire exists. Although I advise against making Holocaust jokes, like my sister definitely didn't do because she's a public school teacher. I flew the Falcon with my sisters, and it was the greatest thing ever, exclamation point. There are even hacks which you can perform to accentuate the experience. And yes, I smacked the bulkhead every time I walked in the cockpit. I made a lightsaber and nearly fucking cried when Yoda spoke to us. I'd show it to you, but I left a kyber crystal in it and burned out the batteries. Seriously. Kathleen Kennedy made the argument that there is more Star Wars ahead of them than there is behind them, and that the park should reflect the present state of the universe. She's not wrong. I hear you saying Kathleen Kennedy's going to develop a female-centric Star Wars series. Aren't you pissed about that? Why? A female-driven Star Wars series isn't a bad idea on its own. Representation matters. It's only woke bullshit if they don't improve the story with the point of view. If it ends up as good a series as The Mandalorian, no one will care if the lead is female. They'll appreciate it. If they pull a Doctor Who and drive the series into the ground with unwatchable episodes, then it belongs to the ever-expanding scrap heap of Star Wars crap. And then they'll try again. Leslie Headland is the latest controversy. Now, I do not have any inside information, but I do not think Disney is ever actually going into development with Headland. Any quick Google search can tell you why. Just look at the names. Kennedy may have acted rashly with announcing Headland and may be pushing an agenda within Lucasfilm, that whole Fempire striking back, but it doesn't matter. Because Star Wars lightning can strike anywhere, even on a woke bullshit female-centric series. And Kennedy might still get her way, so I wouldn't place your bets just yet. Don't underestimate a long-time Hollywood executive. If she gets Disney to agree in principle to a female Star Wars series, then it's easy enough to sacrifice Headland as part of the negotiation. It's the old Hollywood adage, nobody knows nothing. So finally, if you're looking for the real good stuff in the Star Wars universe, then look elsewhere. To the books, to the games, to the fans. Star Wars came along at a time when technology was opening up on the consumer level that allowed for fans to make their own movies. Star Wars was always ripe for parody, and was parodied immediately. If you've never seen Hardware Wars from 1978, well, you don't need to see Hardware Wars from 1978. All right, I'll put a link. It's really not good. And it's long for being not good. But at the time, it was hilarious. And by the time the 1990s rolled around, amateur filmmakers from all around the world began offering their takes on Star Wars. Some were absolutely great. Troops was Cops, just with stormtroopers, and Lucas supposedly enjoyed it so much that he claimed it as canon alongside the original film. Which means, if you've never seen Troops, then you've never actually known how Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru died. Domestic violence call, believe it or not. Accident with a thermal detonator. Yeah, I'll put a link, another link. This tradition of homemade Star Wars films continued and thrived for two main reasons. One, the toys. Fan films were the most natural extension of playing with the toys, where we had been telling our own Star Wars stories for years. And two, because Lucas let it happen. In a world where George Lucas had every right to extend the harsh hand of copyright protection, he instead allowed the fans to take responsibility for his property. And the fans treated it very well. Small announcement, by the way. Sidekick Shecky and I are going to start reacting to a bunch of Star Wars fan films. And the next one up is the very excellent Vader, Episode 1. So like and subscribe for that, especially if you made it this far into the video. So even today, I'm hopeful for the future of Star Wars, not because of Disney specifically, but because of the long lineage of fans. The original trilogy is still bringing in the kids. And once the magic takes hold, it's with you for a long time. That magic is the inspiration that becomes art. And through art, we can see what is possible. We scream that we can make a better film than that, and sometimes we do. So go do that. If you don't like the current state of Star Wars, then make one for yourself. It's easier to destroy than it is to build, but there is no great reward in the rubble. So if you have a lightsaber, a phone, and an idea, you probably have a Star Wars movie in you. Or just go back to the Star Wars you loved, because it's still there. The movies, the books, the games. The holiday special. The holiday special. I'm gonna link the holiday special. I'm Uncle Tony, and that's my Star Wars rant. I'm fine with it. I'm good with everything that's happening, and let the new generation of cream rise to the top of the Star Wars content vat. Will it be any good? Difficult to see. Always in motion, the future is. Like and subscribe. Share this content. We do weekly reaction videos on this channel, other nonsense. We sure could use the numbers. So click some buttons, man. If you made it this far, why not subscribe? Like Belushi said, don't cost nothing. May the 4th be with you. And in case it's not the 4th anymore, just remember, the 4th will be with you. Always.